Hey guys, tonight we are trading your air conditioning and memory foam mattress for something a little more ancient. You wake up on a woven mat in a mud-walled hut, somewhere along the Ganges plain. No doors, no privacy, just a smoky haze from the indoor cow-dung fire, a buzzing symphony of mosquitoes, and a rooster that thinks 3:45 a.m. is the perfect time for a concert. The good news, you're alive. The bad news, so are the lice in your hair, the intestinal worms in your belly, and the rigid caste system that just decided your whole life path while you were still drooling in the womb. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is. Drop your location and local hour in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stretch slowly because your back feels like it's been fighting a buffalo in its sleep. You slept on a mat so thin, it makes a yoga mat feel luxurious. It's stuffed with straw, which sounds organic and rustic until you realize it's also stuffed with mold, bugs, and the vague smell of goat pee. There's no mattress, no pillow, and absolutely no such thing as a blanket unless you count your own sweat. The hut you're in has one room, shared by your entire family, including livestock. There's an elderly uncle in the corner, coughing up something ominous, a toddler crying because a beetle crawled over his foot, and a goat who seems way too interested in your ankles. There's a shelf, but it's not for books. It holds a few metal bowls, maybe a religious idol, and some dried cow dung cakes you'll be burning for cooking and warmth. The roof is made of thatch and good intentions, which means it leaks just enough to keep things interesting during monsoon season. You're in ancient India, probably around 300 BCE. You're not a warrior or a scholar or a wealthy merchant. You're a peasant or shudra, a laborer, a nobody in the grand Vedic scheme of things. The caste system says your karma puts you here. Your aching spine says the gods need to try sleeping on this mat for a night. There's no electricity, no bathroom, no kitchen, no doors. Really just a cloth you tie up at night and pray no wandering snake takes that as an invitation. You live in a world without glass windows, antibiotics, deodorant, or the ability to call in sick. And yes, you're already probably sick, or at least mildly inflamed. You try to breathe deeply and center yourself. Maybe pretend you're doing ancient yoga, but the smoke from last night's cooking fire has yet to clear the room. And you're fairly sure it started a long-term relationship with your lungs. Your throat scratches, your eyes burn. And the only relief you'll get today is when you leave the hut into 95-degree heat and 90% humidity. You're 19, and by the way, that's not young. It's the beginning of middle age. Statistically speaking, you're on the downward slope now. Childhood diseases took your cousins. A couple of your siblings didn't survive past age 5. And even if you make it to 30, your knees will probably feel like they've been grinding gravel since you were 8. Now, you may be thinking, surely they had some comfort. Well, yes, comforts like being told your suffering builds good karma, or that the lice in your hair are part of the cosmic cycle of rebirth. A fringe belief at the time claimed that enduring hardship was a spiritual practice, which is good, because you're already practicing very, very hard. Historians still argue whether the strict caste rules were a stabilizing force or a straitjacket. But for you, right now, they mean you can't even dream of changing your station. Want to study Sanskrit forbidden? Want to become a merchant? Laughable. Want to lie down for 5 more minutes? Only if your rice field decides not to exist today. Outside, the village begins to stir. Roosters crow, cows shuffle. Someone is already pounding grain. And you haven't even figured out where to relieve yourself yet. That will be its own horror. But for now, you blink against the haze, try to find your sandals. Oh wait, you don't have any eye, and step into the day. Your first full one in ancient India. You step out of the hut, barefoot. Because of course you do. Sandals are a luxury reserved for people higher up the cosmic food chain. You squint against the already blinding sun, and your feet instantly find the sharpest rock in the universe. Congratulations, you've started the day with a stabbing pain to remind you that gravity is a personal attack. The world around you smells like a curious blend of cow-dung, smoke, and wet earth. The floor of your village is not paved, it's just packed dirt, sprinkled lovingly with cow-dung, slurry to keep the dust down. Yes, that's the ancient version of Febreze. And yes, your job today is to help reapply that very mixture with your bare hands in an optimism you no longer possess. Your morning begins not with a stretch or a cup of tea, but with chores that would qualify as punishment in modern times. You fetch water half a kilometer away from a river that's equal parts sacred and suspicious. You carry it back in a clay pot balanced on your head, because apparently physics is also not on your side this morning. Along the way, you pass other villagers doing the same, forming a parade of the perpetually overworked. Let's take a quick detour into your house again, because you've got to light the fire for breakfast. That means crouching over yesterday's ashes, gently placing dried cow dung patties, and blowing life into embers with your breath like some miserable forest witch. No lighters, no matches, no stove, just your face full of smoke and the growing realization that your eyebrows may not survive the season. Eventually, you produce a flame and put on some lentils. That's it, just lentils. Maybe rice if it rained recently and the gods were generous. You don't cook in the modern sense. You boil, you stir, and you silently resent your past life karma. Spice only if you've hoarded dried chilies. Salt, better pray your village trader didn't drink away your share. Butter, that's for Brahmins. You're lucky if your food doesn't include a surprise ant protein. And this is assuming you have food. Famine was a recurring guest in ancient India. One bad harvest, one flood, or one troop of monkeys stealing your crops. And the village pantry turns into a philosophical exercise in not panicking. Historians still argue whether early agricultural societies in India had adequate food storage systems. But you argue with the rat in your grain pot. As you eat, your family gathers in the same room. Your father's hands are calloused like bark. Your mother's fingers are bandaged from grinding millet. No one speaks during meals, not because of discipline, but because chewing coarse lentils takes all your energy. The food is warm, but not comforting. It's sustenance. It fills your belly, but empties your will to live just a little more each time. Still chewing? Let's multitask. While you eat, you're mentally preparing for your day's labor, farming, mostly, or weaving, or carrying firewood, or hauling mud for someone else's roof. None of it is glamorous. All of it is sweaty. And the heat. The heat has a personality. It doesn't just surround you. It judges you. You look at the sun and realize it's only mid-morning. You feel like you've lived 3 lifetimes and accidentally re-entered the 4th. Your back is sore. Your feet are filthy. And the day hasn't even begun in earnest. There's also the matter of your younger siblings crying because one of them swallowed a beetle and the other has a rash. No doctor is coming. There is no doctor. Just a healer who chants things and applies turmeric like it's a magic spell. And maybe it is. You hope it is. Because otherwise, you're just rubbing yellow powder on a mystery rash and calling it medicine. And still, amidst all this, people laugh. They joke. They sing while pounding grain. Its strange hope hides in the strangest places. But don't get comfortable. Because once you finish that lentil soup, you'll be walking to the fields, barefoot, with a plow that's essentially a stick and a prayer. Modern wellness gurus love talking about grounding, walking barefoot on the earth to feel connected. You are grounding. You are one with the soil. And your feet are now 50% callous and 50% regret. By now, your skin glistens with sweat and ash. The dog you don't own follows you like it pities you. Your neighbor sneezes so hard it chicken flees. The heat climbs higher, and you still haven't even gotten to the worst part, the toilet situation. We'll get there, but first, the sun must rise higher, and so must you, clay pot in hand. Tasks on your mind? And absolutely no coffee in sight. So, nature calls, loudly, repeatedly, and rudely. But you're in ancient India, so no flush, no porcelain throne, no scented candle, and certainly no privacy. Instead, you head for what's generously referred to as the outskirts, which is a polite way of saying somewhere slightly beyond where you cook food, but still very much where you live and breathe. The bushes are your lavatory, your meditation zone, and a mosquito's happy hunting ground. There's no toilet paper. Of course not, you have leaves, or smooth stones, or, if you're really living it up, a handful of water from a small earthen pot, and a firm belief in hand washing. Historians still argue whether ancient Indian hygiene practices were advanced for their time, or simply impressive in their enthusiasm. Either way, it's a two-handed operation, and let's just say you better really trust your left hand. This is where caste starts creeping into your life in unpleasant ways. If you're upper caste, you get a slightly better bush. If you're lower caste, well, maybe you're also in charge of cleaning up other people's business too. With your hands, without gloves, with the sun watching, the flies gathering, and your dignity somewhere in the next village over. Remember how some cultures used to yell "Gardy-loo" before throwing waste out the window? Ancient Indian cities tried their best. Urban planning in places like Mohenjo-daro actually featured brick-lined drains and early toilets. Very impressive if you lived thousands of years ago and also happen to be wealthy. But you're not in Mohenjo-daro, and you're definitely not rich. So the drain is the dirt path behind your house, and the system is hope it doesn't rain too hard. You squat, trying to balance over ground that's either too soft or too rocky. A goat watches. Why is a goat watching? You don't know. Maybe he's judging your form. Maybe he's just waiting for the warm spot. You try not to think about it. You're too focused on not falling over. Now comes the real spiritual test, washing. You walk to the water source, again, carrying a small brass lota, the same one everyone else in the family uses. You use your left hand in water. As tradition dictates, there is no soap, there is no sanitizer, just the deep, existential hope that water really is purifying. Of course, that water source, it's the same one you bathe in and drink from, and sometimes wade through when it floods. The Ganges is sacred, yes, but it's also, let's say, multitasking. You might be thinking, at least the cities had public toilets, right? Sure, communal pit toilets, usually dark, fly-infested, and with zero doors. They were a social event. You didn't just go alone. You went with friends, sometimes strangers. You squatted beside someone and made awkward eye contact while pretending you weren't hearing every gurgle and splash. Toilets were less about privacy and more about mutual shame. And women, oh, poor women. They didn't even get the daylight. Modesty rules meant they often had to wait until nightfall to relieve themselves, leading to all kinds of infections, pain, and predator risk. Ancient women were not just managing menstruation without pads or tampons. They were doing it while avoiding eye contact, shame, and wild animals, which, coincidentally, is also how they had to give birth. Want a quirky tidbit? Ancient texts talk about designated toilet gods. That's right, deities for defecation, because even the gods, apparently, had to go. Some houses even had small shrines to protect them from toilet demons, which is only slightly less horrifying than using a toilet in complete darkness with a torch and the fear of being bitten by a rat. At this point, you're longing for something, anything, to make this feel normal. A soap ad, a squatty potty, a tutorial video, but none exists. Your ancestors are winging it with confidence. And you, dear time traveler, are deeply unprepared. You trudge back to your hut. You're sweaty, embarrassed, slightly damp in all the wrong places. And you now fully understand the phrase, dirt poor. You have no toilet paper, no flushing, no closed door, no ventilation. But you do have a goat friend who, for some reason, is still following you. At least you're not alone. Everyone smells. Everyone squats. Everyone walks around with just enough shame to keep quiet and just enough pride to not die of it. And you, well, you've just survived your first ancient Indian bathroom break. Barely. You've made it through your morning bathroom. Misadventure. Which means it's time for breakfast. And by breakfast, we mean a philosophical exercise in redefining hunger. You don't choose the food. The food chooses you. And sometimes it chooses to kill you. You sit on the mud floor, cross-legged, next to your family. There's no table, no chairs, no plates. Really just banana leaves or flat clay discs. If you're lucky, the first thing plopped down in front of you is a grayish mound called khichdi, a mushy blend of lentils and overcooked rice, with the consistency of regret. It tastes like it's trying its best. No spices. No salt, because spice is precious and reserved for festivals, guests, or if someone important dies and the household is feeling generous. You chew slowly, not because you're savoring it, but because your teeth hurt, and this is the only way to delay the inevitable grit. Remember, grinding stones aren't exactly precision machines, so you're getting protein from the occasional chunk of actual stone dust. Dental hygiene. Who, if you're from a farming family, maybe you get a raw onion on the side. No, not chopped, not caramelized, not dipped in sauce. Just an onion. A full, proud, pungent orb of flavor punishment. You bite into it like it's an apple. Tears streaming, not from emotion, but from sheer sulfuric violence. Still hungry. There's some reggie, rochi, a flatbread made from millet, hard as a battlefield shield, and about as tasty. Try not to chip a molar. Historians still argue whether ancient grain-based diets improved health or simply wore down your spirit until you stopped complaining. One thing is certain. It fills your stomach. Eventually. Kind of like swallowing a fistful of sand and calling it dinner. Want something to wash it down. You reach for water and then pause. Because your water came from a bucket drawn from the same river where your neighbor did laundry and your cousin washed their cow. Instead, you get buttermilk. If you're lucky. Spoiler alert, it's mostly just sour water with a cloud of mystery dairy and maybe a bug or two floating near the rim. Extra protein. You might dream of sweets. Sorry. Sugar is rare and sacred. You'd get jaggery, a dark brown chunk of molasses candy that tastes like hardened sadness and sticks to your teeth with the clinginess of a bad relationship. And don't even think about honey unless you plan to wrestle a beehive by hand. Meat ha, only if someone dies, or gets married, or dies while getting married, which happens more often than you'd expect. Meat is luxury. Cows are sacred. Pigs are taboo. Chickens are feisty and hard to catch. And goats are too valuable. So your daily meals are mostly plant-based, which in this context is less a dietary choice and more a symptom of poverty. Remember the Vedic texts praising food as sacred, and the importance of feeding guests as divine duty sounds nice. But that's for people with food. You're just trying to avoid starvation. Occasionally, you're handed a mystery curry. It has chunks of something. It's hot. That's all you know. It might be boiled pumpkin skin. Might be a root, might be rat, but you eat it. Because calories, in cities like Varanasi or Pataliputra, there are street vendors. But unless you're rolling in cow-dung covered gold, you can't afford it. They sell samosas or puffed rice with tamarind chutney if you can brave the flies, the heat, and the likelihood that it's been sitting out for 6 hours marinating in sweat and urban dust. Quirky tidbit. Ancient Indian street food was so popular that some Sanskrit texts include entire dialogues set at snack stalls, proof that even 2,000 years ago, people argued over who ate the last Veda. You lick your fingers clean because there are no spoons. You also lick them because there is no napkin. Just the same hand that, let's not forget, played a key role in your bathroom saga a few scenes ago. You're still hungry, of course, but hunger is like a roommate now. Always there, annoying, whining softly in your gut. You get up from your banana leaf, burp a little sadness, and prepare for the rest of your day, hoping lunch will be more exciting. It won't be. You're full, but only in the technical sense that something is in your stomach and it's no longer growling. That moment of brief caloric triumph is now replaced with a new sensation, discomfort, specifically the itchy, damp, and spiritually degrading sensation of what you're wearing. Welcome to ancient Indian fashion, brought to you by the textile innovation of whatever we could spin from plants or animals and beat against a rock. If you're a man, you might be wearing a simple dhoti, a long piece of cloth wrapped around your lower body like a toga's insecure cousin. No buttons, no belt, no dignity when a gust of wind hits. You spend half your day retying it, and the other half trying not to trip over it. Upper body optional, unless you're from a wealthier caste, in which case you might have a thin shawl to drape across one shoulder, a formal nod to modesty that still leaves 80% of you exposed to dust, insects, and public judgment. If you're a woman, congratulations, you get a sari. It's beautiful in theory. In practice, it's 5 meters of unstitched fabric that you have to wrap, fold, pleat, tuck, and drape using memory, finger strength, and a prayer. No elastic, no pins, no manual. Just ancestral intuition and muscle memory passed down from generations of exhausted women who also had 0 tutorials. And yes, both outfits look stunning in Bollywood films. But those actors are not walking 6 kilometers to the nearest well in 40-degree C heat with a basket of cow dung on their heads. Now let's talk about material. Cotton existed. Sure. Ancient India was a pioneer in cotton production. But the stuff available to you is coarse, hand-spun, and about as soft as aggressive sandpaper. It absorbs sweat like a sponge, holds odors like a grudge, and never, ever dries. Linen silk. Those are for royalty, priests, and the kind of people who have servants to carry fans made of peacock feathers. Not you. You are the fan. You wave your arms and hope your damp torso doesn't start sprouting mushrooms. And shoes. Let's be generous and call them foot-adjacent items, if you own footwear at all. It's probably a pair of Paducah's wooden flip-flops with a single knob for the toe. They make a loud clack-clack sound when you walk, offering the dual benefit of blistering your feet and announcing your poverty with every step. Sometimes they're decorated, but not for your comfort, just so people know you're suffering in style. Washing clothes is a luxury chore, done maybe once every few weeks. If you're near a river and feeling bold, you slap the garment against a stone, rinse it in gray water full of soap nut froth and fish pee, and hang it on a thorny bush to dry. It dries crusty. It dries uneven. It dries with the smell of yesterday's curry and your cousin's goat. Let's not forget lice. They are your constant companion. Lice don't discriminate by caste or creed. They love everyone, especially people who share sleeping mats, clothing, and a general disinterest in changing outfits. You spend at least 10 minutes a day picking through your scalp, like a monkey auditioning for a spa commercial. Fleas also join the party, along with mosquitoes, ants, and why not an occasional centipede in your undercloth? Quirky tidbit. Ancient texts often warned women not to wear brightly dyed clothes on certain moon cycles. Why historians still argue whether it was due to religious taboos or the ancient Indian belief that color attracted bad spirits and worse in-laws. As for jewelry, rich women had nose rings, bangles, and gold chains. You have an old copper anklet that your grandmother gave you half for tradition. Half because she didn't want to die owing you anything. No socks, no underwear, no seasonal wardrobe. One outfit, all year round. Rain, it gets soaked. Cold, it gets stiffer than your spine. Summer, it steams like a sauna towel. And still, you wear it because there is no choice. Your entire identity is wrapped in fabric that makes you itch, sweat, and trip. And guess what? You have to wear it again tomorrow. Your teeth ache constantly. It's not a sharp, sudden pain, though you'll get plenty of that. Later, it's a dull, throbbing misery that lives in your jaw and radiates into your temples like a bad decision echoing through bone. You wake up with it, chew through it, and go to bed wondering whether dying in battle would be less painful than eating another date. Welcome to dental care in ancient India, or more accurately, the complete and glorious absence of it now. To be fair, ancient Indians did know a few things. The use of chewing sticks dantacatha was widespread. People would snap a twig from a neem or babool tree, chew the end until it frayed, and scrub their teeth with it. Natural antiseptics, they said, herbal wisdom, they claimed. But let's be honest, this is a tree branch. A twig with dreams of dentistry, and unless you're disciplined about using it daily and have twigs that haven't already been gnawed by squirrels, it's not exactly plaque's worst nightmare. Toothpaste? Nope. Tooth powder, maybe. If you're rich or religious, you might have a little mix of charcoal, salt, and crushed herbs. It tastes like spicy sand and works about as well. And if you're a commoner, good luck even getting that. Most people just rinse with water and hope the pain goes away. It doesn't. Now, imagine a cavity, one that starts as a twinge and becomes a full-blown throb every time you eat anything too sweet, too hard, too hot, or too cold, which is basically everything in your diet. There's no Novocaine, no dental drills, no cute receptionist with a clipboard asking you to rate your pain on a scale of 1 to 10. What you do have is a local healer with a pair of iron tongs, or worse. A blacksmith who moonlights as a tooth remover. He doesn't ask questions. He just grabs, yanks, and tells you to scream into a cloth if you don't want to frighten the livestock. Infection is inevitable. Tetanus is optional. The best case scenario is a missing molar. The worst is sepsis and death. And either way, you'll probably get judged for your bad karma, as if divine punishment chose your mouth for a moral lesson. Your gums are swollen, bleeding is normal. Breath, imagine garlic left in a clay pot for 3 months. You try clove oil. You try turmeric paste. You try chanting mantras into a mirror, because at this point, you're open to both medicine and witchcraft. Still hurts. And don't think this is just a problem for the poor. The elite classes, with all their ghee-rich diets and honey-soaked desserts, suffer too. In fact, one Sanskrit poem includes a line about a nobleman whose smile was fair, but death lived behind it. Poetic. Also, dental trauma. The real kicker, historical records from Ayurvedic texts like the Charaka Samhita discuss dental issues, but mostly in the abstract. Tooth worms were a popular theory. Yes, tiny invisible worms living in your teeth, chewing holes while you sleep. Historians still argue whether this belief was symbolic or literal. Either way, the treatments ranged from the hot oil rinses to inhaling medicinal smoke. Nothing says spa day like smoking tree resin through a conch shell because you bit into a rock-hard lentil. Quirky tidbit. In some regions, beauty standards included blackening the teeth with soot or ash. Why? Because white teeth were considered ghostly, unnatural, and just a little too Roman. So, if your smile didn't kill your dating prospects, your breath probably would. Let's not forget there are no dentists, none, no waiting room with fish tanks and smooth jazz, no dental floss, no anesthetic, no tiny chair that reclines, just you, your jaw, a lot of pain, and maybe an elder who suggests letting a leech balance your humors. Spoiler, the leech is not certified. So you chew slowly, carefully. You favor one side of your mouth, then the other, then back again when both give up. Every bite is a gamble. And when you finally lie down to sleep, you pray for dreams that don't involve biting into anything harder than air. And tomorrow, you get to do it all over again with one less tooth to worry about. You're up with the sun, or rather, you're dragged up by the sun, which is less a warm golden orb and more like a judgmental boss glaring through your thatched roof. Your body aches, not from some workout or a late-night jog, but from the entirely unremarkable act of existing. You are a laborer in ancient India, and rest is a concept reserved for death. Let's review your to-do list. Wake up, stretch if your muscles allow it, eat something if there's anything left from the night before, then start working, immediately, with no warm-up, no coffee, and definitely no paid time off. You're a cog in the endless cycle of subsistence labor, and your reward for keeping civilization running. A lifetime of back pain, and probably scurvy. You're likely a farmer, not a sleek tractor-driving farmer. No. You have a bent wooden plow, a pair of oxen that hate you, and a chunk of land that's just dry enough to sabotage your dreams. You till. You sow. You pray to gods with names longer than your life expectancy, and you do it in 100-degree F heat, with dust sticking to your sweat like nature's exfoliant. Your tools are glorified sticks. Iron ones if you're lucky, but mostly sticks. And your hands calloused, cracked, and darker than any SPF chart can measure. You've given up on shoes, they just collect mud. Your toenails are history. Your feet are maps of misery. But maybe you're not a farmer. Maybe you're a potter, or a weaver, or a blacksmith hammering metal over a fire so hot it might qualify as a minor deity. Or a tanner boiling animal hides in urine because, surprise, that's how leather gets made. You stink. Everyone stinks. Smell is a social contract you all silently signed and then set on fire. If you're a woman, congratulations, your job is everything. You grind grain, fetch water, cook food, raise kids, clean the house dirt to slightly organized dirt, milk the cow, and still get blamed if the harvest fails. Multitasking? Please. You were born multitasking. You haven't sat down in 3 years. And kids? Oh, they get to be kids for 5 years. Then it's off to help in the fields, carry water jugs larger than their heads, and occasionally scare away monkeys from the crops. Childhood is a modern luxury. Here, it's more of a fast-forward button to arthritis. There are no weekends, no holidays unless they involve fasting or firewalking, and even those feel like unpaid overtime dressed in spiritual garb. If the gods are pleased, maybe it'll rain. If they're angry, maybe it won't. Either way, you still work. One historical record from the Mauryan period describes royal inspectors ensuring that laborers weren't overworked. How considerate, but historians still argue whether that was actual policy or just a nice thing the king told himself while reclining on silk cushions. Reality leans toward the second option, and if you complain, you don't. There's no HR. There's your landlord, or your village headman, or someone who owns the land you're bleeding on and prefers that you suffer quietly. If you get injured, you keep working. Limping is just walking with flair. Here's a quirky tidbit in some artisan guilds. Workers would smear turmeric on their hands to prevent infection. Yellow palms were considered both antiseptic and fashionable. That's right, you're glowing with health and style. Until, of course, you get a splinter the size of a dagger, and no one knows what tetanus is. You eat standing up. You work while eating. You sleep thinking about work. You dream about not working, then wake up to more work. If you're lucky, you marry someone who also works. And if you're really lucky, you die before your spine gives out entirely. In this world, retirement isn't a phase. It's an afterlife. Maybe. If the gods feel generous. Until then, you lift, carry, push, pull, and shuffle through each day, half a step ahead of exhaustion. And when you pause for a second, you realize something. You've forgotten what rest even feels like. And just when you think your biggest enemy is your boss, your landlord, or possibly the cow that kicked over your rice pot this morning, here comes the real villain of ancient India, the weather. There is no thermostat, no Alexa. Cool the room. Just monsoon madness or infernal drought. Served on a loop. You are not living in a climate. You are surviving in an elemental lottery where the jackpot is only slightly less miserable than the rest. It's currently summer, or as the ancients call it, 5 straight months of spiritual dehydration. The heat doesn't just warm you, it vaporizes your will to live. Your home, made of mud and bamboo, is nature's microwave. You sit on the floor, which is also hot. You breathe hot air. You sweat. The sweat doesn't cool you. It just mixes with the dust and becomes a personal crust of suffering. And there's no fan. The best case scenario is waving a palm frond like a sad royal who never made it to the palace. Worst case, you lie still and imagine what ice felt like. Now here's a quirky tidbit. Elite families sometimes placed clay pots filled with water in breezy corners of their homes to cool the air as it passed over them. Historians still argue whether this actually worked or if it was just ancient placebo, like spiritual air conditioning minus the electricity, the breeze, and the hope. But let's switch seasons, because now it's winter. You'd think, oh, finally, some relief. But no, this is cold as betrayal. You're still sleeping on the floor, no heater, no woolen blankets unless you bartered away your dignity, or 2 chickens. You huddle next to a fire pit, if you even have fuel, and sleep in layers of everything you own, which might be 3 tunics and a goat. The walls of your house do not insulate. They invite the wind in for a cup of tea. Your breath fogs in front of you. Your fingers crack. Your nose runs like a broken dam. And still you go outside. Why? Because labor doesn't hibernate. Rainy season. Let's talk monsoons. They arrive like an uninvited guest too much. Too fast. And just when you've repaired your roof, water pours from the sky like a divine punishment. Floods wash away entire villages. Roads vanish. Crops drown. Your sandals turn into pudding. And your walls, so lovingly smeared with cow-dung, start to dissolve like the dreams of dry socks. And yet people still hold festivals. You might be ankle-deep in mud, but you're also holding a garland and singing about Krishna. Because in ancient India, joy was an act of rebellion, or denial, possibly both. Clothing doesn't help. You wear cotton thin, breathable, and absolutely useless when wet. There are no zippers, no waterproof anything, no dry closets. When it rains, you're a sponge. When it's cold, you're a windsock. And when it's hot, you're a baked potato wearing optimism. And no, there's no laundry machine in this equation. You wash your clothes in the river, slap them on rocks like they insulted your ancestors, and then dry them on thorny bushes while praying a goat doesn't eat your only loincloth. Your skin splits from cold. It blisters from heat. Insects chew on you during the summer, and mold hugs your belongings during the rainy season. You smell like smoke, sweat, and seasonal depression. But guess what? That's normal. Here's a real historical fact. Ancient Indian medical texts like the Charaka Samhita recommend seasonal regimens Ritucharya, a detailed guide for surviving the whims of weather gods. These include things like eating warming foods in winter, cooling foods in summer, and generally staying sane through ritual. Unfortunately, most peasants don't have the luxury of following Ayurvedic spa menus when they're just trying not to be carried off by mosquitoes the size of poetry. And speaking of bugs, have you tried sleeping through a summer night with no screen door, no netting, and one ear constantly alert for the whine of your mortal enemy? Welcome to mosquito hell. They find you, they bite you, they leave gifts in the form of malaria, dengue, or something even less pronounceable. Weather is not just inconvenient, it is war. Every day is an ambush by the atmosphere. You adapt, barely, and every time you adjust, the season shifts again like a sarcastic god whispering. Plot twist. You don't get to win, you get to endure. Water, the very essence of life, the thing your body is mostly made of, the element that poets revere, that rivers personify, that gods bless and curse alike. And in ancient India, it's your frenemy. You wake up thirsty, parched tongue, cracked lips, and that fuzzy taste of breathing dusty air all night. You step outside, walk barefoot down a dirt path, dodging cow-dung and yesterday's festival leftovers, all for one sacred goal water. Now the good news, there's a river nearby. The bad news, so does everyone else, including every other living creature. That cow bathed in it. That uncle brushed his teeth in it using a neem stick that's been passed down like a family heirloom. That merchant dumped dye runoff in it. That funeral procession just floated someone in it. You bend down to scoop water into a clay pot that's older than your spine, knowing full well that this river is a broth of bacteria, silt, decaying offerings, and poetic intention. You drink it anyway, because boiling fuel costs money and thirst doesn't negotiate. Historians still argue whether most people in ancient India understood germ theory or just had divine faith that the Ganges would rinse away not just sins, but also cholera. Bathing. Now we enter the performance art portion of survival. In theory, bathing is sacred. You're supposed to cleanse your spirit and body in running water while chanting prayers and maybe fasting. In practice, bathing is a dangerous ritual best done while fully alert and slightly afraid, because once you're wet, you're vulnerable. Ancient texts warn that water opens the pores, which might as well be an invitation for every airborne demon to waltz in. Also, if you're not near a clean water source, bathing becomes theater. A village pond might serve triple duty for washing clothes, livestock, and humans ideally in that order. But don't count on it. And if you're a woman, privacy isn't just rare, it's mythical. Modesty must be improvised using walls of other women. And even then, onlookers aren't always discouraged. You bathe less often than you'd like. Once a week, if you're fancy. Once a fortnight, if you're realistic. Hair is cleaned with flour, ash, or shikakai paste, because shampoo won't be invented for several lifetimes. You scrub yourself with gravel or husks, for the comforting illusion that you tried. And despite all that, yes, you're still dirty, your intestines. Meanwhile, are playing roulette. Parasites are common. Worms, oh yes. Intestinal bugs, all shapes and ambitions. You host them like a poorly managed Airbnb. Clean water is so rare that when it shows up, people assume it's magic or poison, sometimes both. Quirky tidbit in some rural traditions, elders would test water purity by placing a silver coin in it overnight. If the coin remained shiny, the water was safe. If it dulled, you blamed witches, or humidity, not germs. Of course, those are future people problems. Waterborne diseases are the real villain of this timeline. Dysentery, cholera, typhoid, and other unspeakable stomach dramas plague entire communities. Dehydration from diarrhea is a slow, humiliating exit, but a common one. Children, especially, don't stand a chance. One bad drink and they're in divine hands by morning. But here's the irony. Water isn't just a daily hazard. It's also a religious superstar. Rivers are worshipped. Sacred ponds are believed to hold cosmic power. Pilgrimages are made just to touch holy water. You might be dehydrated, diseased, and dunked in something questionable, but you're spiritually cleansed. And isn't that nice? You don't get filters. You don't get plumbing. You get hope. And maybe a hollow reed to sip through if the pond smells too strong that day. There are communal wells, sometimes. But fetching water is a full-body sport. Lift the pot. Carry the pot. Don't spill the pot. One wrong step, and it shatters. Which means you're now thirsty, barefoot, and emotionally shattered. Still, you do it. Because not doing it means shriveling up like old papyrus. You don't have options. You have duties. And so, water is not your savior. It is your test. Every sip is a gamble. Every wash is a prayer. Every step toward the river is one away from convenience, dignity, and modern plumbing. And now, in this final moment, as we leave behind the fire, the dust, the heat, the dysentery, and the broken sandals, you crouch by the river. You stare into its murky reflection, and for a split second, you think, maybe this isn't so bad. That's the dehydration talking. And now, the river hums quietly behind you. The sky has softened into dusk, filtering peach light through the trees. The village noise fades. Crickets take over, and the distant clatter of clay pots feels less like survival and more like rhythm. You sit still, clay cup in hand, the last rays of sun gently slipping down your back. Your breath slows, muscles unclench. The absurdity of everything, the lice, the worms, the goat in your bed, the bread that doubles as self-defense feels. Somehow, far away, it's funny, in a tragic sort of way. How people once lived like this. Or maybe it's tragic. In a funny sort of way, you survived the day, barely, mentally and physically frayed, but not broken. And in the quiet of this fading moment, that feels like an accomplishment. After all, the good news is you're alive. The bad news, you're still in ancient India, but not for long. So let the flickering torchlight lull your thoughts. Let the breeze cool your skin. Let your mind wander somewhere softer. Tomorrow will come soon enough. But for now, rest.
Now, we tiptoe into the lacquered silence of a forbidden city corridor. Past crimson columns and silk curtains that don't just shimmer, they whisper. It's dawn in ancient China, and somewhere in the heart of the palace, a young girl is being married to the emperor. She doesn't speak, not because she's shy, but because speaking isn't part of the job description, not yet. Anyway, you would never think that becoming empress meant acting like expensive furniture. But here, silence is just step one. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time. Let's see who else is awake while empresses get picked like rare fruit. She's been chosen not for charm, wit, or the ability to carry on a conversation, but for auspicious eyebrows, the smoothness of her voice, and most importantly, the alignment of the stars when she was born. Imperial astrologers spend weeks poring over charts, birth dates, and the occasional chicken bone to determine who will harmonize the heavens when they walk beside the Son of Heaven. Love doesn't even make the short list. The empire wants balance, babies, and good fortune, and if possible, no omens involving comets or red rain. Her family has spent a fortune preparing her. The dowry procession includes bolts of brocade, carved jade, folding screens, lacquered boxes, and more gold than anyone plans to count. It's not just generosity, it's status advertising. A low-ranked girl with enough cash can become very empress-shaped. And of course, her feet have been bound compressed into tiny, ornate symbols of submission, elegance, and long-term orthopedic damage. She cannot walk without help. But she's expected to run a palace. Historians still argue whether the dowry's true purpose was financial investment, political bribery, or just ancient flexing. Some say it empowered women by giving them personal assets. Others say it just turned them into walking ledgers. Either way, she arrives in a sedan chair heavier than her future emotional support load. The ceremony itself is a spectacle of controlled choreography. She bows 3 times. He barely glances. Red silk is everywhere wrapping gifts, lining walls, veiling her face like a bridal curtain crossed with a stage prop. No vows, no kiss, no cake, just incense, silence, and someone scribbling down the exact minute she stepped into the Hall of Union, in case the gods want receipts. When it's done, she's led away by attendants to a room she's never seen to prepare for a night she hasn't been briefed on. Her name is now Empress, and her job is to make heirs, maintain appearances, and definitely never outshine the Emperor, even if he forgets her name within a week. You sit in the corner, pretending to be a fan holder, and wonder how many girls are dreaming of this exact life without realizing it's a gilded cage with excellent drapery. The Empress doesn't dream. She calculates. Because in this palace, marriage is not an ending or a beginning. It's a position, a role, a carefully written scroll folded between duty and diplomacy. And her story is just getting started. You follow the scent of sandalwood through a narrow hallway, your silk shoes muffled against polished stone. Ahead, a pair of carved doors open into the Empress's wedding chamber, not romantic, not private, but prepared like a stage for an oddly specific type of performance. The bed is raised, lacquered red, draped in embroidered phoenixes. The sheets are silk, of course, but beneath them is a thick layer of implication. You're not here to relax. You're here to witness the ancient Chinese royal version of quality control. This is the consummation ritual, not whispered, not shy. It's choreographed. The new Empress will lie beneath layers of formal robes, while the Emperor arrives at the appropriate ceremonial hour, usually after consulting an almanac that also advises on weather and agricultural rituals. It's not about love, it's about confirmation. One fringe account even describes 2 palace servants standing just beyond a screen to observe. Not participate, just to ensure protocol was followed, very respectfully, and with excellent posture. There's no such thing as alone time in the Forbidden City. What happens in the wedding bed might as well be a state record. Sometimes, red silk cloths were placed under the couple to collect what might generously be called evidence of success. That cloth could then be presented to senior court women or stored discreetly in a ceremonial box. Historians still argue whether this was literal practice or heavily ritualized symbolism, but you can't help noticing how many boxes there are for such a private moment. The bride is silent throughout, not stoic trained. From the moment her betrothal was confirmed, she's been prepped like a ceremonial vessel, bathed in fragrant herbs, coached in etiquette, taught which foot to place forward, and which gaze to hold just long enough without it becoming threatening. Even her hair has been styled according to ancient cosmological charts. Her head is a map of harmony, and tonight, she must radiate dignity while her future depends on whether a sheet gets inspected. The emperor, for his part, often arrives late, bored, or drunk, or all three. For him, this is one of many. He's married the state. She's married into a lottery. The odds aren't great. Some stories speak of brides who were dismissed the next morning, deemed unworthy for reasons never explained. Others woke to find themselves promoted, praised, and assigned new silk wardrobes before breakfast. One particularly ambitious empress reportedly bribed a court eunuch to sprinkle rosewater on the silk to fake a more impressive result. No one questioned it. The empire thrives on symbolism, not blood work. There is no conversation, no cuddling, no candlelit storytelling. Just a quiet procession out at dawn, with the Empress now formally touched and catalogued. Her next chapter begins with tea, ceremonial congratulations, and the subtle but unmistakable pressure to become pregnant as quickly and elegantly as possible. You slip out of the chamber as dawn bleeds into the palace courtyards. Another set of servants arrives to fold the sheets with solemn reverence. The room is reset. The story continues, and privacy that never really arrived. You drift behind a veil of carved screens, where the scent of peony oil and powdered sandalwood thickens like old perfume and thin secrets. This is the emperor's inner court, the harem, not a room, but a living, breathing network of strategy and silk. Hundreds of women live here, each more adorned than the last, and none of them free. You might expect whispers of love, affection, perhaps shared glances. What you hear instead are schedule rotations and fragrance selections, because in this place, even attraction has a filing system. The harem is ruled by hierarchy. At the top is the empress first wife, official partner, symbol of heaven and earth. Below her are consorts of various ranks, all the way down to palace maids who might catch the emperor's eye and find themselves suddenly promoted and permanently watched. It's not romance. It's career advancement with better hairpins. Historians still argue whether the harem system offered real political leverage or was just containment with wallpaper. Here, the emperor doesn't choose whom he visits based on desire. He consults a schedule crafted by the inner palace staff, overseen by high-ranking eunuchs and influenced by court astrologers. One night, Consort Wang, another, Lady May. Some even marked their perfume jars to accidentally remind him of previous visits. Fringe accounts tell of one concubine who faked a fainting spell just to get reassigned from Tuesday to Friday, a more auspicious night for conception. The process is meticulous before a visit. The selected consort is bathed in flower-scented water, dressed in formal nightwear silk. but still armor, and carried, yes, literally carried on the back of a eunuch to the emperor's chambers. She isn't allowed to walk. Walking is too unceremonious. She arrives like a gift, presented with solemn silence and a whole lot of unsaid expectation. And if she becomes pregnant, the stakes multiply. Suddenly, she has power, but it's conditional, fragile, and highly flammable. A pregnancy can elevate a woman to noble consort, even to empress if no sons exist. But it can also paint a target. One rumor of bad behavior, one accusation of witchcraft, and the same child that gave her status might vanish into a record labeled natural causes. You pass a courtyard where concubines pretend not to listen to each other. Embroidery circles double as intelligence hubs. Gossip is currency. Even silk patterns can be passive-aggressive. One consort allegedly embroidered a scene of plum blossoms outlasting peonies, an unsubtle dig at a rival's fading charm. The imperial palace is very polite, and also a battlefield. The emperor. He's mostly unaware, or at least uninterested, in the daily warfare unfolding over his bed schedule. He thinks in legacies, names, sons. He doesn't think about the 10,000 combs being aligned, or the strategic positioning of teacups near the koi pond. Scholars still argue whether these women lived lives of suffocating indulgence or silent agency. Some wrote poetry. Some influenced policy through pillow talk. Some vanished after one night and were never mentioned again. All of them wore masks even when no one was looking. You leave the harem the same way the emperor does, quietly, without ever really seeing it all. You shuffle down a Tudor hallway that smells like ambition and something lightly roasted. The walls are draped in tapestries depicting loyalty, betrayal, and an unusual number of deer being stabbed with flags. At the far end sits a throne-sized chair, and in it Henry VIII, monarch enthusiast, and enthusiastic collector of wives. You don't walk into his court. You enter a history book halfway through a nervous breakdown. Henry doesn't fall in love so much as declare it retroactively. His first wife, Catherine of Aragon, was originally married to his brother. When that didn't stick, he married her himself after getting a special papal permission slip that later backfired like an overcooked boar when she failed to provide a male heir. He didn't just divorce her, he invented an entire church to make it happen. Historians still argue whether that was theological conviction or romantic overkill. Each marriage is a political maneuver disguised as a passionate choice. Anne Boleyn, political firecracker, intelligent, fashionable, witty, and executed after 3 years. You'd think a queen's biggest fear would be illness. Here, it's Henry's attention span. After Anne came Jane Seymour, who delivered a son but inconveniently died of complications before Henry could lose interest. You sit through the next weddings like a bewildered guest at an all-royal speed dating event. Anne of Cleves arrives via portrait, literally. Henry sends for her based on an overly flattering painting, then panics when she shows up looking real. He divorces her in record time but gives her a pension and a palace, which is probably the happiest ending anyone gets. Catherine Howard follows a teenager surrounded by dangerous uncles and even more dangerous rumors. She's gone within 2 years, beheaded, and blamed for smiling too much. Then comes Catherine Parr, smart, cautious, and the only one who outlives him. Not by luck, by strategy. She's the queen who knows how to read theology and the room. She nods, she smiles, and she keeps a foot near the exit. Henry himself doesn't age gracefully. By his sixth wife, he's limping, ulcerous, and convinced he's a god. But he still believes in romance as long as it arrives with flattery, obedience, and maybe a politically advantageous family attached. One fringe account even claims he considered a seventh marriage just before his death. But no one could locate a bride fast enough or brave enough. Historians still argue whether Henry was a passionate monarch or a petulant tyrant with access to rings and swords. What's certain is that he made marriage look less like a sacred vow and more like a temporary job with no benefits and a very high mortality rate. You leave the court slowly, careful not to say anything treasonous or flattering. Both can get you executed, because under Henry's rule, love might get you crowned, but boredom gets you beheaded. You adjust your collar and step into the royal presence of a queen who has no king, no wedding ring, and absolutely no intention of acquiring either. Elizabeth I doesn't flirt, she performs. Her court is a stage, and the question of marriage is the longest-running drama in English history. You sit among courtiers holding their breath while foreign ambassadors prepare emotionally for rejection delivered via metaphor. Welcome to the Virgin Queen's favorite sport, making marriage proposals sound like bedtime stories that never end. She's not anti-romance. She's just pro-power. Every suitor from Spanish princes to French dukes gets the same dazzling routine. A twirl of her fan, a witty comment that sounds like maybe, a glance that hints at eternity, followed by years of polite stalling. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth truly meant to remain single or just found marriage too politically messy to ever be worth the paperwork. One thing's clear: no man ever stood a chance once she figured out that not marrying was her strongest weapon. You watch as she charms the entire French delegation into believing she might marry the Duc d'Alençon. He's 20 years younger and allergic to England. Yet she keeps him close with letters, nicknames, and ceremonial flirting that makes Parliament twitch. When the negotiations collapse, she gives him a parting gift and a very public sigh of regret. The crowd cheers. The proposal is over. The performance flawless. At home, her subjects call her Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, the living embodiment of national purity. But behind the curtains, she surrounds herself with a rotating cast of favorites: Robert Dudley, the Earl of Essex, and a handful of suspiciously handsome poets. Her rooms are filled with roses, allegories, and very locked doors. One fringe tale suggests she had a secret passage built between her private chamber and Dudley's, though the evidence is about as solid as court gossip written on lace. The pressure to marry never really fades. Parliament asks, nobles hint, foreign rulers prod, but Elizabeth holds her ground like a fortress in pearls. Her famous line, "I am already married to England," sounds noble, until you realize it also lets her control every diplomatic table. If she's unwed, she's always in play. If she's always in play, no one can plan too far ahead. It's not spinsterhood, it's geopolitical suspense. Scholars still argue whether her refusal to marry stemmed from childhood trauma, a fear of childbirth, or pure strategic genius. Maybe it's all of the above. After all, she grew up watching her father dispose of wives like seasonal wardrobes. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, lost her head before Elizabeth turned 3. You don't grow up in that kind of palace and crave a white dress, so she smiles. She rules. She recites poetry under the moonlight and makes sure the men around her remain loyal, infatuated, and firmly unmarried. Her reign lasts 45 years. You leave her court not with the image of a lonely queen, but of someone who saw every marriage trap from a mile away and waved from the edge. Because some crowns sit heavier when shared, and hers, you duck behind a velvet curtain, quiet as a quill, into a room thick with perfume and ink. Here, marriages are built not with flowers or kisses, but with paper long, flowing letters sealed with wax and layered in layered meanings. You'd think a royal marriage would be conducted in public view, but the truth lives in locked drawers and coded metaphors. In ancient China and Tudor England alike, love was often written, sometimes whispered, and always risky. In the imperial court, one emperor famously wrote dozens of poems to a favorite concubine, lavish, melancholic, and allegedly composed by his own hand. They speak of moonlit gardens, unspoken longing, and comparisons to plum blossoms that, frankly, set a high bar for seasonal metaphors. But when court politics shifted, those same verses were used to shame her. She was exiled within days. Historians still argue whether the poems were heartfelt or just the 10th century version of love bombing before ghosting. Meanwhile, in Tudor England, a different kind of ink was turning hearts into liabilities. Anne Boleyn, before she wore the crown or lost her head, exchanged flirtatious letters with Henry VIII, filled with innuendo, religious references, and the kind of vague phrasing that sounds innocent until you realize it was read by half the court. One of her notes, allegedly written during her rise, was later cited during her trial. Love, it turns out, made excellent kindling for accusations of treason. You peek at a parchment folded so tightly it still smells like rose oil. In it, a Chinese empress pens a plea for her husband's attention, wrapped in elegant calligraphy and indirect sadness. She can't demand affection, but she can describe a lonely moon and a withering jasmine bloom. The emperor receives it. He doesn't reply. Instead, she's reassigned to less favorable quarters. One fringe tale claims she left ink marks in the shape of tears deliberately smudged. For effect, emotional stagecraft at its finest. In both cultures, written affection walked a tightrope. A letter could elevate a courtly romance or become evidence in a downfall. In some rare cases, lovers used invisible ink made from lemon juice or crushed herbs, meant to be read only under candlelight. In others, they encoded messages into embroidery patterns or book margins. One English noblewoman reportedly stitched an entire sonnet into the hem of her underdress, just in case it needed to be burned later. Scholars still argue whether these letters were truly private, or if they were always written with a third eye, knowing full well that someone, someday, would read them aloud in a courtroom or a palace hall. Either way, They survive in archives and libraries like soft-spoken ghosts, revealing affection that dared to exist in a world that punished sincerity. You fold the letter gently and place it back, because whether the words brought love or loss, they were written with hands that knew the cost. And you've read just enough to know that in royal life, the pen is never just for romance. It's also for defense. You sit beside a lacquered table in a chamber full of anxious silence and moon-shaped pillows. Nothing has gone wrong yet. But the queen is late to her bath, and that means she might be late to her fertility tonic, which means someone's entire week is about to spiral. Royal marriage is never just a romance. It's an ongoing fertility crisis with royal wallpaper and embroidered expectations across dynasties and continents. Queens and consorts were measured by what they could or couldn't produce. In ancient China, the empress is expected to become pregnant as swiftly as possible, ideally with a son, and ideally during a highly auspicious hour involving planetary alignment and a lot of cinnamon incense. One fringe practice involved tying small jade pendants to the empress's belt during pregnancy to absorb moonlight and ensure celestial favor. Spoiler, it did not prevent morning sickness, but it looked great in portraits. Every morning begins with a pulse check, literally. Imperial physicians are summoned to delicately touch the empress's wrist, cloaked beneath layers of silk, and declare whether she might be with child. Not because of symptoms, but because of rhythms, breath, and, occasionally, guesswork. Historians still argue whether these diagnoses were legitimate medicine or polite prophecy. Either way, when the doctor smiles, the entire palace exhales. In Tudor England, the pressure is equally brutal. The royal womb is basically national infrastructure. You watch Queen Jane Seymour being fussed over by midwives while Henry VIII anxiously updates his will. When she finally gives birth to Edward, their celebration's so loud it almost drowns out the part where she dies from infection. Elizabeth's mother, Anne Boleyn, miscarried a male fetus, an event that reportedly changed court favor overnight. Here, fertility isn't a private journey. It's the fate of a dynasty with a side of childbirth trauma. Meanwhile, rumor is treated like ultrasound in both empires. A slightly rounder stomach or extra helpings at dinner could trigger a royal pregnancy rumor. One Tudor maid of honor was banished for looking too hopeful. In China, a consort once faked a pregnancy using cloth padding and an abandoned baby from another palace wing. The emperor praised her maternal instincts. Weeks later, she vanished without ceremony. Royal children, when they do arrive, are swaddled in layers of silk and expectation. Boys are celebrated with parades, poems, and dramatic monologues from astrologers. Girls are welcomed quietly, then handed to wet nurses while the mother quietly recalculates her place in the hierarchy. You hold a teacup while a concubine tries not to cry over her daughter. She wanted a son, she got politeness. Scholars still argue whether these women had true agency within their gilded reproductive roles. Some wielded influence through motherhood, shaping policy from the nursery. Others were replaced, demoted, or retired into decorative obscurity when nature didn't cooperate. The palace had no patience for biology's fine print. You step away from the nursery, past a row of painted cranes and embroidered lotus flowers, symbols of fertility sewn by women who knew exactly what was at stake. Because in royal marriage, the crown doesn't weigh nearly as much as the expectation it hides. You stand at the edge of a marble courtyard where celebrations once echoed, now eerily silent. A silk banner still flaps from last month's wedding. But the bride she's missing, royal marriage, for all its ceremony and scented oils, has a much darker postscript. Here, when affection fades or politics sour, you don't get a separation, you get a solution. Welcome to the chapter where vows turn to verdicts and exile is the best-case scenario. Let's begin in the Forbidden City, where a favored consort once coughed during a poetry recital. 2 days later, she was gone, officially ill, but unofficially escorted out with a scroll, a guard, and a strong suggestion never to be seen again. One fringe tale tells of a concubine who was caught accepting a secret letter from her brother, just correspondence, just family news. She was sentenced to hang herself using a ceremonial silk ribbon to preserve her dignity. Silk, after all, is much quieter than rope. In Tudor England, discretion was never the goal. You stand outside the Tower of London, where queens enter but rarely exit smiling. Anne Boleyn blinks during a trial, and the court calls it arrogance. Her alleged crimes include witchcraft, adultery, and having a daughter instead of a son. There is no defense team, just a panel of noblemen and a very sharp axe. Historians still argue whether the charges were fabricated, exaggerated, or simply excuses to change the channel on Henry's romantic life. Catherine Howard meets a similar fate. Accused of unchaste behavior before and during her marriage, she's 17, surrounded by enemies, and reportedly cries so hard before her execution that the block has to be reinforced. Henry marries 6 times. 5 of those wives disappear from his life by death or divorce. Only one outlives him, and she does so by never asking too many questions. Back in China, it's not always death, it's demotion. Empresses stripped of rank are given new titles like peaceful lady or silent matron, then moved to distant palace corners, far from the emperor's sight and memory. No servants, no letters, no name spoken at court. A few are sent to Buddhist temples under the polite fiction of spiritual retreat. A very soft form of vanishing. Occasionally, there are poetic endings. A queen banished for political scheming lives out her days writing melancholic poetry that becomes wildly popular after her death. A consort exiled for speaking too freely becomes a cautionary tale sung by palace musicians. Their stories survive, just not their names, and sometimes the punishment is weirder. One Tudor noblewoman suspected of inappropriate affection was forced to walk barefoot through the palace, holding a candle in shame while courtiers watched. Because nothing restores dignity like supervised humiliation and a wax stick, scholars still argue whether these downfalls were law, vengeance, or emotional power plays dressed in velvet. But one thing's certain in royal marriage: being loved is not a guarantee of safety. In fact, it might be the opposite. You step back from the balcony. The silk banner still moves, but the woman it honored, she's already a ghost. You sit beneath a faded silk canopy, The candles low, the stories slower, and the air thick with endings. The halls are quieter now. The grand weddings, the jeweled dowries, the whispered promises, they've all folded into memory. But here's the secret, even when royal marriages end, they don't end. Some are retold, some are rewritten, and some continue into the afterlife. Because in both ancient China and Tudor England, the marriage vows don't always stop at death. Sometimes they begin there. In a small, moonlit Chinese village, a family prepares for a ghost marriage. A young man has died before his wedding day, and rather than let his spirit drift unmarried into eternity, they hold a ceremony to wed him posthumously to a girl who also died young, or sometimes one who's still alive. Her approval is not always considered essential. A wooden effigy might be used. Dowries are exchanged. Paper servants are burned. And the couple is joined in spirit, if not in body. Historians still argue whether these ceremonies were acts of love, superstition, or social insurance to ensure no soul lingers alone. One fringe tale tells of a concubine whose restless spirit allegedly disrupted court life for years, appearing in dreams, shattering ink pots, and causing imperial horses to buck during processions. Eventually, to appease her, the emperor's son held a wedding ceremony between her spirit and a recently deceased court musician. Peace was restored. Sort of. Meanwhile, in England, queens who died tragically were not just buried, they were immortalized. Anne Boleyn's ghost allegedly walks the tower, carrying her head tucked neatly under one arm. Catherine of Aragon's tomb draws silent tributes each year, roses left by women who see in her quiet suffering a kind of resistance. Even Elizabeth, who never married, lives on in portraits, poetry, and the slightly unsettling way historians keep trying to posthumously marry her off to anyone. Royal marriage, it seems, was never just about two people. It was legacy, ceremony, theater, a way to manage time, power, and fate itself. You look back across the stories and realize the silken beds, the vanished letters, the jade pendants and silk nooses, all of it was part of a system that turned love into policy and policy into ritual. Some queens are remembered by the children they bore, others by the heads they lost. Some are etched into poems. Others live on only in footnotes or hairpins buried deep beneath palace stones. You reach the final page, the last chamber, the quietest hall. The emperor sleeps. The queen no longer waits. The ink dries on a letter never sent. And the marriage, it echoes, not as a vow, but as a ghost of something sacred and strange. Wind down. So now, as the torches flicker into shadows and the silk curtains stop swaying, let yourself settle beside the stories. Rest among the veils and vanished names. Let the quiet hush of palace walls and the soft sigh of distant letters lull you towards sleep. The queens are resting. The ink has dried. The vows are whispered, not shouted. And tonight, you carry none of the weight, only the wonder. Sleep well, royal watcher. The past has said its good night. Now, we slip past mirrored walls and chandelier shadows into a banquet hall where the air smells like roasted poultry, perfume, and people trying very hard to pretend they're not hungry. Welcome to Versailles, where the tables are longer than your career prospects, and the swans are not just served, they're styled. The room glitters in gold leaf, but your fork weighs more than your sense of purpose. You would never think a banquet could be both extravagantly lavish and aggressively inedible. But this is royal France, where food is politics with a caramel glaze. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And post your location and local time in the comments, just to prove you're not watching this from under a banquet table. Tonight's setting is the Hall of Mirrors. Although no one's looking in the mirrors, they're too busy pretending not to look at each other's plates. The table stretches for what feels like an entire arrondissement. Silver platters the size of chariot wheels bear whole glazed swans with their feathers artfully reattached. Yes, reattached. The cooks spend hours roasting the bird, then carefully sewing the plumage back on for effect. You are not expected to eat it. You are expected to admire it until your stomach forgets how food works. Next to the swan, a roast peacock arrives. Its tail is open, sprayed with something floral, and no one touches it. It is literally here for vibes. Louis XIV, seated somewhere in the middle of this gilded catwalk, eats with measured flourish, surrounded by nobles who chew like they're performing surgery with their molars. One duchess coughs delicately into a napkin. She hasn't eaten since sunrise. But appearances matter more than nutrients. Historians still argue whether these feasts were actually about sustenance or merely acts of decorative intimidation. Every plate is a hierarchy. The closer you sit to the king, the warmer your food and the less likely it is to include beets. The further away you might be served something creatively labeled wild forest meat that suspiciously resembles pigeon with an identity crisis. A fringed tale tells of a dish so ornate, doves baked into a pie that flew out when cut, that it startled the Marquise de Maintenon into spilling her wine on the Dauphin. It became known as the poultry incident, and no one laughed. Not publicly. In Versailles, even a roast chicken can end a friendship. You nibble a sugared almond. You sip wine that tastes like ambition and grapes with trust issues. Musicians play in the corner, and you suspect at least one of them hasn't eaten either. You feel dizzy, not from the wine, but from hunger, corset pressure, and the haunting knowledge that the entire boar centerpiece is hollow. This is not dinner. This is social calculus with silverware. A power performance staged with goose fat and marzipan ceilings. And you haven't even reached the soup yet. You shuffle into a courtyard within the Forbidden City, following the scent of lotus root and freshly lacquered anxiety. Tonight is an imperial banquet, which means one thing exactly: 108 dishes, arranged in perfect symmetrical harmony, none of which you are expected to finish or, honestly, understand. The Qianlong Emperor reclines behind a screen of silk and protocol, plucking at his food with golden chopsticks that have seen more diplomatic tension than your average treaty. Welcome to a dinner party where numbers matter more than appetite, and luck is something you eat, one tiny bite at a time. The number 108 isn't random. It's cosmologically significant, like numerology with better snacks. Each dish represents a seasonal blessing, a celestial coordinate, or an ancestor's vague approval. You sit cross-legged before an endless stream of porcelain bowls, each hand-delivered by servants moving with the synchronization of an Olympic calligraphy team. The rhythm is mesmerizing, dish down, bow, retreat, repeat. And no one, not even the emperor, finishes what's served. Because in the Qing court, fullness is vulgar, and so is chewing too loudly. Historians still argue whether these banquets were religious rites, loyalty tests, or just how an emperor flexed without actually lifting anything. The entire court watches what he eats, and more importantly, what he doesn't. If he skips the jellied sea cucumber, everyone else suddenly loses their appetite for it. 2. If he takes 2 bites of the steamed deer tendon, that's tomorrow's headline. One fringe account tells of a feast where Qianlong ate nothing but sliced lotus root in vinegar for 3 hours, just to make a silent point about restraint. It was unclear what that point was, but 3 ministers fainted from confusion or possibly hunger before dessert arrived. The food is beautiful, though even the dishes that smell like boiled seaweed look like edible art. You try a dumpling shaped like a peony. It tastes like cold turnip pudding wearing perfume. Next comes a bowl of double-steamed bird's nest soup, served with a single goji berry floating like a lost swimmer. The emperor nods politely. You nod too. No one swallows. Everything is served in silence. Talking is for poets, and poetry happens after dessert. That's when officials recite verses about the glory of the empire and the fragrance of the emperor's virtue, both described using an alarming number of fruit metaphors. One man compares imperial wisdom to a particularly juicy lychee. No one laughs. Scholars still debate whether these meals functioned more as edible audits or celestial rituals in ceramic form. The emperor's palate wasn't just a preference. It was a map of court dynamics. Serving the wrong mushroom at the wrong time, that's not a kitchen mistake. That's an omen. You rise, stomach barely disturbed, but brain absolutely overwhelmed. Because in this palace, eating is never just eating. It's a choreography of control served cold, garnished with obligation, and always followed by 5 types of melon you're too afraid to touch. You find your seat 4 chairs from the king, 6 from the roasted boar, and already your appetite is under surveillance. This is Versailles, where the table shimmers with gold trim, and the meat stares back like it knows you won't dare to touch it. You'd think a royal feast would be a time to eat. But here, it's more like a living museum of edible intimidation. Every guest is starving, but no one wants to be the first to chew. The boar has been roasted whole, apple in mouth, saddle on back just in case someone feels like riding it metaphorically into political favor. Alongside it, pigeons stuffed inside chickens, stuffed inside ducks, all garnished with gilded parsley and existential dread. You don't choose a dish. The dish chooses whether you're allowed to pretend to enjoy it. One duchess across the table reaches for a slice of venison and immediately regrets it. The knife slips, the gravy splashes, and 2 viscounts stop breathing. A fringe story says she fainted not from embarrassment, but from the realization that her napkin wasn't linen, it was lace. Scandalous. Historians still argue whether this elaborate discomfort was etiquette gone wild or just psychological warfare with meat. Forks were used like surgical tools. Napkins were folded with mathematical precision. One baron allegedly practiced his chewing face in a mirror before formal events. The results were noble adjacent. No one eats first unless the king does. And even then, the chewing must be discreet, measured, and absolutely silent. Louis XIV, though, is having a great time. He's on his third helping of lamb glazed in orange blossom and irony. He doesn't notice that half the room has gone pale watching a pâté that jiggles too enthusiastically. One noble tries to whisper something witty. His neighbor pretends not to hear. This is how friendships dissolve one syllable at a time. Servants glide between chairs like ghosts, refilling glasses with wine no one will drink, and replacing untouched bread with newer, warmer, still untouched bread. You break a crumb by accident, and 4 eyes meet yours with the quiet ferocity of 1,000 etiquette manuals. You'd think dessert would offer a reprieve, but no. The custards are sculpted to resemble Greek columns. The fruit has been arranged in a miniature replica of the palace gardens, and the cream too symmetrical to disturb. One fringe account tells of a guest who tried to compliment the chef. The compliment made it to the royal ear. The chef was promoted. The guest, demoted presumably for thinking he had taste. You glance down at your plate. The meat is still steaming. The garnish still poses like it's auditioning for a painting. You're beginning to hallucinate a conversation with a roasted pheasant. And that, of course, is when they bring out the soup. Because nothing says royal confidence like serving a room full of terrified nobles a consommé so clear it reflects their own regrets. You slip past a carved screen in the Forbidden City and into a room where the dishes are lying, not verbally, visually, because here, what looks like a steamed peach is actually a ball of pickled melon. The lotus dumpling, a mushroom jelly in disguise. The imperial chefs have reached a level of culinary deception that borders on theater, and your taste buds are just along for the deeply confusing ride. At this Qing banquet, nothing is what it seems. The table gleams with a feast of edible illusions, tiny ducks that are really sculpted tofu, shrimp made of sugar, and a plate of translucent jelly shaped like bamboo shoots that wobbles with existential purpose. The emperor, as always, looks amused. He takes one nibble, nods once, and the entire room pretends they know what just happened. Fringe accounts speak of dishes that took days to prepare and seconds to misidentify. One particularly dedicated chef once carved a fish entirely from mung bean paste, complete with fake scales made from translucent rice paper. The emperor was so impressed, he ordered it preserved in lacquer rather than eaten. Historians still argue whether this was culinary genius, psychological warfare, or just what happens when you have 800 kitchen staff and too much time. You try a moon-shaped bun that smells like almond and regret. It turns out to be lotus root with a vinegar glaze. The server bows silently, as if daring you to pretend you liked it. You do. because pretending is part of the meal. This isn't food, it's imperial performance art. Every dish is a metaphor. The 100-layer egg doesn't actually have 100 layers. It's one egg steeped in symbolism and fermented mystery. One guest once tried to count the layers. He never got invited back. Meanwhile, the emperor's dish comes plated with a poem, etched into a thin slice of bamboo using vinegar ink. He reads it, snorts gently, and eats the paper. Apparently, it's edible too. The poet gets a promotion. The chef, he gets to keep his fingers. Scholars still debate whether these illusion dishes were designed to flatter the emperor's intellect or simply distract him from court intrigue. If so, it worked. You spend 15 minutes eating a walnut that turns out to be sweet potato shaped by someone with too much ambition and not enough supervision. There's even a dish called Dragon in a Cloud, which is just fish wrapped in rice dough steamed inside a gourd that looks vaguely sentient. It arrives in its own tiny palanquin, carried by two servants who chant softly in Mandarin while trying not to trip over the symbolism. You look down at your own plate. It's a dumpling shaped like a frog. It winks. Or maybe that was the lighting. Either way, you eat it, slowly, carefully, and you smile, because in this palace, the truth is never on the plate. It's in the performance, the illusion, the perfectly timed confusion that makes you question whether your tongue just fell in love or filed a formal complaint. You've barely recovered from the edible jelly frog incident when you're shuffled into a velvet-draped salon at Versailles, where the next course isn't food, it's alcohol. Not just wine, but an entire operatic performance of liqueurs, brandies, and herbal infusions with names that sound like minor nobility. The dukes are already flushed. The duchesses pretend not to sip while absolutely sipping. Welcome to the part of the royal banquet where cutlery is abandoned and diplomacy is fermented. French aristocrats, naturally, don't drink, they taste, until they're 3 tastings in and start singing verses from bad Latin poetry. One glass is apricot and elderflower. The next is distilled from apples, thyme, and something that may or may not have been illegal even then. A fringe account claims one duke tried to toast the king with a concoction containing actual pearls ground into dust. The king thanked him, then secretly fed it to a goose. Historians still argue whether these royal drinking sessions promoted international camaraderie or just made it easier to forget that no one had eaten in 3 hours. Either way, they were ritualized with precision. There were specific toasts for different nobles, a formal order of consumption, and, famously, a game called La Rivière Rouge, the Red River, in which nobles had to pass a goblet without spilling, speaking, or insulting someone's outfit. Spoiler, they usually failed. You watch as a bishop in powdered wig slurs a hymn while gripping a glass of something so sweet it could sedate a rhino. A duchess politely coughs into her lace gloves and pretends she hasn't just knocked over a candied quail with her elbow. Servants swoop in to remove the evidence. The king smiles. The wine keeps flowing. The dishes during this stage are questionable. Duck blood stew in a glass ramekin, prepared with a foam of liver that resembles nothing nature intended. Guests poke at the offerings like they're identifying minerals. Not dinner. Someone claims the flavor is complex. Someone else claims to be allergic to texture. One nobleman attempts to perform a drinking poem while balancing a spoon on his powdered nose. A marquis begins speaking Italian for no reason. You sip a cordial of rose water and cloves and wonder if it's secretly perfume back in the Forbidden City. They're not immune to festive sipping either. The Qianlong Emperor favored a fermented rice wine that was so strong, it reportedly fogged up jade goblets. At one banquet, officials composed spontaneous poetry after every shot, a tradition called Xing Shi Zhe Yan, or inspired nonsense, depending on how many rounds had been served. Scholars still debate whether these drinking rites encouraged creativity or simply ensured plausible deniability. Back in Versailles, the room grows louder, redder, slipperier. Someone has challenged a Hungarian count to a duel over who mispronounced cassis. You pretend not to notice as a chamber musician collapses softly behind a harpsichord, because here, in this sugar-drenched haze, dinner has become theater, and the wine, it's the playwright. You are now staring at a jade-green bowl the size of your head, filled with untouched delicacies that glisten in the candlelight like small, edible lies. You're in the Forbidden City again, and you've stumbled into a cultural paradox, the imperial leftover. Here, whatever the emperor doesn't eat becomes sacred, not divine. Exactly, just dangerously untouchable. This is not food anymore. This is relic. Each banquet, the emperor is presented with dozens of courses, more than any one mortal could consume. He samples a few, maybe raises an eyebrow at a pigeon wrapped in gold-leafed bamboo, and the rest off limits. You do not touch what the Son of Heaven has ignored. The food sits, cooling and congealing into evidence of excess, while dozens of courtiers pretend that's totally fine. One fringe tale claims a servant once filched a half-eaten peach from the imperial platter and was reassigned very quickly to latrine maintenance. For 10 years, his family never ate stone fruit again. Historians still argue whether this tradition was based on reverence or an exquisitely overcooked sense of hierarchy. The official explanation: the emperor's food carries his cha, his sacred life force, and should not be contaminated by lesser palates. The unofficial reason power: it's not just what the emperor consumes, it's what he doesn't have to. These leftovers don't get binned. No, they're cataloged, marked, sometimes even photographed with ink scrolls and stored in back rooms where imperial food auditors... Yes, that was a job record, exactly what was served, touched, sniffed, or ignored. You think modern food waste is bad? Try 36 uneaten shark fin soups being lovingly escorted to a side chamber like they just gave a TED talk. Meanwhile, in Versailles, the food fate isn't much kinder. There, leftovers from royal banquets occasionally go to high-ranking courtiers. But even that is a minefield. Accepting the wrong half-scooped terrine, you're accused of being greedy. Declining a slice of the king's untouched pie, clearly, you're disrespectful. A fringe account describes a countess who tried to gift a leftover cake to her cousin, only to be scolded by a cardinal for trafficking in royal crumbs. In both courts, waste isn't waste, it's pageantry. The untouched dishes say more about power than the eaten ones. They represent options, control. The emperor or king could have eaten them, but he didn't. That's the point. One rare exception when the emperor explicitly offers a dish to someone. It's seen as divine favor. One Qing minister was offered a spoonful of bird's nest soup and reportedly kept the bowl sealed in a box for the rest of his life. Scholars still debate whether he ever actually ate it or just sniffed it annually for luck. You glance again at the jade bowl, still untouched, still sacred. The room hums with unspoken rules, and the faint aroma of steamed scallion dumplings never to be tasted. You're hungry, you're terrified, and above all, you understand now. Here, not eating is the ultimate meal. You brace yourself with a candied almond and wander into the part of the banquet where things take a sharp left from fine dining into full-on spectacle. You're not watching a performance beside the meal, you're watching the meal perform back. At Versailles, a trained monkey in a velvet waistcoat is serving wine to a duke with more perfume than pulse in the Forbidden City. Dancers dressed as koi leap between platters of actual koi. Somewhere, someone's roast is juggling. This is banquet entertainment royal style, meaning no one asked for it. Everyone's pretending it's normal, and there's a very real chance someone's wig is going to catch fire. At the French court, food isn't just edible, it's interactive. One fringe account speaks of a dwarf in gold-plated armor riding a goose-shaped tricycle across a banquet table, delivering candied eels to nobles. You're not sure which part is more surprising, the armor, the eels, or the fact that no one blinked. Historians still argue whether these acts were intended as satire or if Louis XIV just got bored between courses. Elsewhere in the room, powdered musicians play duets on sugar flutes, yes, real instruments, carved from crystallized syrup. One baron tries to bite his, it shatters. He applauds anyway. The king laughs. It's unclear if the baron will still own land by morning. Meanwhile, Qing banquets elevate absurdity to a quiet, disciplined art. Imagine a puppet opera performed atop a rotating dessert tray, where each puppet represents a virtue, a historical general, or a dumpling. There are fish dances, where actual performers in silk tails flip and twirl beside steaming fish soup. There's a performance called Plum Blossom Crying at Dawn, which involves an opera singer, 2 lanterns, and a soup spoon filled with tears. Probably. Scholars still debate whether these extravaganzas were artistic innovations or distractions from how inedible some of the dishes had become. In a place where court tension simmers like the duck broth, laughter, even if forced, is a politically useful sound. Back at Versailles, things escalate. A marquis attempts a toast while balancing a tray of flaming custards. A viscountess coughs as her powdered wig smolders from a misjudged flambé. The swan centerpiece is now being used as a prop in a tragic mime routine. You sip from your wine glass like it's a shield. In the Forbidden City, A clockwork phoenix made of porcelain eggs rolls across the floor and releases steam, part mechanical marvel, part dumpling steamer. A fringe tale claims one banquet ended with a magician pulling noodles from his sleeves for 15 minutes while reciting Confucian verses backward. It was considered a political allegory, or indigestion. You sit back in your chair, half dizzy from sugar smoke and secondhand juggling, and realize no one here is entirely sober or sane, and maybe that's the point. Because in these courts, the banquet is never just about food. It's about distraction, delight, dominance, dressed in jelly and velvet. The meal performs you back. The entertainment eats itself. And if your dessert dances, you clap. You shuffle behind a lacquered screen and into a small, scroll-lined chamber where the real action happens, not the eating, not the dancing, but the documentation. Yes, after the feast comes the paperwork, because when you host absurd royal banquets, someone has to keep score. Welcome to the archives, where every dumpling has a record, every sauce has a file, and every pigeon-glazed pastry is logged like state treasure. In Versailles, you find a dusty ledger thicker than your thigh. It lists, in calligraphy so dramatic, it probably had its own powdered wig. Everything served at last week's feast, from the goose tongues in raspberry reduction to the 5 types of artichoke nobody touched. Not for culinary improvement. Just in case the king wakes up in 3 days and says, "Bring me that plum tart from Thursday," and heaven help the cook who doesn't have it on record. One fringe account tells of a court chef who was interrogated over a missing apricot tart, only to discover it had been moved to a flower arrangement by an over-enthusiastic page boy. The tart was bruised. The page boy was reassigned to stable duty. The flower arrangement got a promotion. Historians still argue whether this meticulous logging was about legacy, control, or just the ancient equivalent of Yelp, but in French. Each dish has a name, a date, and occasionally a footnote about who made a face while eating it. If a duke frowned at the hare in mustard cream, it gets mentioned. If the king sneezed while chewing roasted chestnuts logged with flair. It's not just food, it's surveillance with a caramel glaze over in the Forbidden City. The records are even more intense. Qing emperors kept what might be the world's most ambitious dinner diary. Dishes served, time placed, number of bites taken, satisfaction rating, even color harmony on the plate, everything written down by hand, in triplicate, by scholars in silk robes who hadn't eaten a warm meal in days. A fringe tale tells of the Qianlong emperor requesting a certain dumpling from the winter of the 12th year. The kitchen had no idea what he meant. The archivists, however, produced the exact entry down to the spices and the temperature of the broth. The emperor was impressed. The chef cried. The archivists were allowed to sit down. Scholars still debate whether these records were for taste management, future planning, or just another way for the emperor to remind everyone that he remembered everything, including who flinched at the jellyfish salad last March. Even leftovers, as you've seen, get documented. Some are noted as tasted, others declined, and some are simply marked untouched, which, ironically, is a form of royal praise. If a dish is too beautiful to disturb, you've done your job. You walk past shelf after shelf of banquet records, realizing this isn't just cuisine, it's choreography that echoes forever in ink and rice paper. Every dinner preserved like a battle plan. Every sauce listed like a treaty. Because here, meals don't just happen, they get archived. You sit quietly now at a long-abandoned table, the last candle's flame flickering into nothing, as silence settles over silver platters and porcelain bowls. The banquet is over, but not really, because in the courts of Versailles and the Forbidden City, feasts never quite end. They ripple into memory, legend, and sometimes the afterlife. Tonight, we finish with the final course ghost stories, commemorative pears, and posthumous leftovers too sacred to serve. They say Louis XIV's final banquet included a toast so long-winded it outlasted the fish course. He dined on wine-soaked pears, saffron trout, and a spoonful of melancholy. Afterward, he belched loudly. Legend says it rattled a chandelier and declared the meal divine. Within weeks, he was gone. But his menu lived on, handwritten in the palace archive like a love letter to digestion. One of his surviving cooks allegedly kept a lock of the king's hair in a jar labeled flavored by greatness. Fringe or fact, historians still argue. But someone had to label that jar. In the Forbidden City, emperors planned meals for the afterlife with equal seriousness. Clay replicas of favorite dishes were buried beside them, miniature dumplings, bite-sized ducks, even tiny ceramic wine jars. The Qianlong Emperor's tomb allegedly includes a banquet scene rendered entirely in carved jade, with each dish placed according to celestial season. No one eats, of course, but the idea of eating continues forever. Immortality, it seems, is flavored with 5 spice. One court legend tells of a ghostly eunuch who still haunts the imperial kitchens, rearranging chopsticks and whispering complaints about fish being overcooked in the 1780s. In Versailles, more than one guard swears they've heard the ghost of a pastry chef weeping over a collapsed soufflé. Some claim the kitchen doors swing open during stormy nights not from wind, but from unresolved flambé. You walk slowly through a hall of mirrors that now reflects only shadows. The dishes have cooled, the laughter faded, but you can still hear the clink of a spoon, the echo of a powdered giggle, the sigh of a noble realizing they sat through 6 hours of beet mousse for one polite nod from the king. In these palaces, food was never about eating. It was about power, theater, spectacle, and a very real risk of indigestion. Scholars still debate where absurdity ends and sacred begins. When does a dumpling become a relic? When does soup become status? When does a meal become myth? The answer, as you now know, is sometime between the first roast swan and the last syllable of the toast. So now, let your eyes close as the banquet fades behind you. Let the music soften, the clatter cease, the flavors turn to fog. There's no more wine to sip, no jellyfish to fear, just the rustle of velvet curtains and the gentle glow of candle stubs no longer watched by emperors or kings. The table is empty, the record book closed, and for once, no one is judging how much you ate or didn't. Sleep well, banquet dreamer. The feast is done.